Back in 2021, I drove from northern Idaho all the way to Alaska in a converted SUV camper. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, 2 months on the road, camping wherever I wanted. The drive through Canada was long and desolate, with gas stations sometimes hundreds of miles apart. And because I was crossing borders, I couldn't bring my firearm. For the first time in years, I felt vulnerable. One night, after hours of driving, I pulled into a small forest campsite just off the Alaska highway. It was empty. I parked, set up for the night, and fell asleep. In the morning, I decided to stretch my legs before hitting the road. I followed a short trail and found another campsite about 5 minutes in. It looked abandoned, like someone had left in a hurry. Torn bags, broken gear, and trash scattered everywhere. I didn't stay long. Something about it felt wrong. When I got back to my SUV, my stomach dropped. A black pickup truck was now parked right next to mine. Windows tinted, engine off, nobody in sight. I got in my car and drove off immediately. A few hours later, I stopped at an old gas station. As I stood there waiting for the pump, that same black truck pulled in and parked right across from me. The driver never got out. I didn't stick around. I filled up, jumped in my SUV, and drove until the sun went down. I found another secluded campsite tucked into the brush. Hidden, quiet, safe, or so I thought. That night, I stayed awake watching movies on my phone. Around 11, I heard footsteps, dry leaves crunching right outside my window. Before I could even react, a face pressed against the glass. A man staring in at me. I jerked back, heart racing, just as another man ran up and smashed open the rear window. I scrambled to the driver's seat, fumbling for my keys while one of them tried to force the door open. Somehow I managed to start the car just as the back door swung open. I floored it, tearing out of the campsite. That's when I saw it. The same black truck, parked in the bushes, waiting. They had followed me all the way from that first campsite. I didn't stop until I was miles down the road. My hands were shaking as I finally called the police, but it was too late. Out here, they were long gone. I never saw their faces clearly, and I'll never know what they wanted. But the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't gotten away still keeps me up at night. In the summer of 2020, Daniel, decided to do something different. I'd heard you could rent old fire lookout towers in the mountains, isolated little cabins built decades ago to watch for forest fires. Most of them were completely abandoned now, except for the few that hikers could rent. I booked the most remote one I could find in northern Colorado. The listing had only one blurry photo from years ago, and I had no idea what condition the place would be in. But I didn't care. The more isolated, the better. After a 5-hour hike through thick forest, I finally saw it. The tower, sitting on a mountain peak like a tiny wooden cabin raised about 15 feet off the ground. The view from up there was breathtaking. Inside, it was bare bones, just creaky floorboards, dusty windows, and a wraparound balcony. No locks on the doors. But I didn't mind. For the view alone, it was worth it. As the sun went down, I spread out my sleeping bag on the wooden floor and tried to sleep. About half an hour later, I heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. My heart jumped. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else for miles. The door swung open, and in stepped a man. Late 40s, long blonde hair, no gear, no backpack, nothing. "Great place to stay a few nights, isn't it?" he said with a wide grin. I stammered out that I'd rented it for the next 3 nights, hoping he'd get the message. He didn't. Instead, he looked around the empty cabin and said, "Plenty of room in here. It's just you, right?" Something about the way he said it made my blood run cold. I lied, telling him my friend would be arriving any minute. His grin faded. Without a word, he turned and walked down the stairs. When I went outside the next morning, I found a note pinned to the railing at the bottom of the tower. It just said, "Sorry." I knew he had come back in the night. That evening I stayed awake as long as I could. Around midnight, I took my lantern and stepped outside to relieve myself. As I reached the tree line, I saw movement in the shadows. A figure just out of the light. "Hello," I called. No answer. I ran back inside, heart pounding. The whole tower suddenly felt like a trap. Windows on all sides, no locks, nowhere to hide. I kept watch, staring out at the stairs. That's when I saw him, the same man, standing at the bottom step, motionless, staring. For 2 minutes, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he stepped back into the trees. That was enough for me. I packed my bag as quietly as possible, crept down the stairs, and began the long, dark hike down the mountain. I don't think I've ever been so terrified in my life, walking alone through that forest, constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced he was following me. I'll never know what his intentions were, but I know one thing. Had I stayed that third night, I don't think I would have made it out of that lookout tower alive. My name's Lucas, and this happened back in 2019 when I was 21. I was spending the summer at my parents' place in rural Oregon, and one day I thought it would be a fun idea to go camping in the woods behind their property. This wasn't anything special. I'd done it before, plenty of times. I just wanted one of those quiet nights with a tent, a campfire, and some peace away from everything. Around 4 in the afternoon, I packed a small bag, grabbed my tent, and started hiking into the woods. The forest back there stretched on forever. There were no trails, no other campers, just dense trees and silence. After about an hour, I found a nice open clearing. I set up my tent, cleared a small space, and lit a fire. The glow of the flames against the fading sunset was exactly what I wanted, but it didn't stay peaceful for long. Not long after I sat down, I started hearing a voice. A man's voice, faint but close enough to make me freeze. At first, I thought maybe it was just echoing from far away, but the longer it went on, the more it sounded like someone was right there in the trees, just out of sight. It wasn't the kind of place you'd run into random hikers. This part of the forest was practically untouched. After 5 minutes of listening to that voice, I finally called out, just yelling, "Hello?" into the woods. But the second I spoke, the voice stopped. Dead silence. I tried again, and nothing answered back. Something in my gut told me I wasn't alone, and the more I thought about it, the creepier it felt. With daylight fading, I decided to pack up and move camp somewhere else. I walked deeper into the trees, rushed by the dying light until I finally found another spot. This one wasn't as nice, just trees everywhere. But it would do. I got my tent up just in time for the sun to completely disappear. It was quiet again, almost too quiet. I lit another fire and sat there roasting marshmallows to calm my nerves. For a while it worked. Hours passed, and eventually I started letting the fire die down. That's when I heard it again, the crunch of footsteps in the leaves behind me. I froze. It sounded like it was coming from the left side of my camp, but when I looked, nothing. I called out again, but instead of silence this time, a man walked out of the trees and right into the glow of my campfire. He smiled as if it was the most normal thing in the world and sat down next to me like he belonged there. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, holding his hands out to the fire. I stared at him in shock and finally asked, do I know you?" "You might be at the wrong campsite." He just shook his head. "No. That's it. Just no." The tension was unbearable. We sat there in silence for a moment until I finally asked him if he was the one I heard talking in the woods earlier. His smile dropped. He didn't even look at me when he answered in a flat, cold tone. "Must have been someone else." Before I could say anything else, I heard another stick snap from the exact spot I'd heard footsteps earlier. My stomach dropped. This man wasn't alone. When I looked back at him, his eyes locked onto mine. They weren't angry, but they were empty, lifeless. That was all I needed. I bolted into the woods without another word. I could hear one of them yell something, maybe to the other guy, and then footsteps running behind me. But these were my woods. I grew up here. I knew the paths better than they did, and after what felt like forever, I burst out onto the road and sprinted all the way back to my parents' house. They called 911, but when the police searched the area the next morning, my campsite was completely cleared out. No tent, no fire, no trace of anyone ever being there. I never camped in those woods again.